Good afternoon and welcome back or welcome to the Guyana Extractive Sector Transparency Week, this week-long conference. My name is Kitty Sabasley. I am the producer behind the scenes, and I will like to give this over to Ms. RENA GUENDUEZ, who will be the moderator and conversation partner for the upcoming panel.
Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's exciting session on Guyana's national governance and transparency policies and initiatives. My name is RENA GUENDUEZ and I'm the Chief of Party for the Guyana Extractive Sector Transparency Project, and I'm going to be your host for this session. I'm very happy to see so many participants at this specific session, and am pleased to introduce our very distinguished panelists for this session. I'd like to introduce Mr. VISHAL AMBEDKAR, Deputy Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Natural Resources, Mr. NEWELL Dennison, the Commissioner from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, Mr. Bobby Gossel Jr., Senior Petroleum Coordinator for the Ministry of Natural Resources, Ms. THOMPSON, the Guyana Gold Board, and Mr. SRIDAR KANNAN, Operations and Consultant from the World Bank. As we learned during the opening remarks by the Honorable Minister Vikram Bharat from the Ministry of Natural Resources, Guyana's government continues to play an active role in establishing and strengthening anti-corruption measures and disclosing important extractive sector, mining, oil and gas, forestry and fishing data and information on the sector. Some have resulted in recent government developments that include work on a mining cadastre and petroleum system, legal and regulatory reform for the petroleum sector, and annual sector reporting through the Guyana Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, also referred to as the GYEST reporting mechanisms. Guyana's voluntary commitment to international, national, and regional initiatives and agreements, such as the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, EITI, and the recent landmark signing by the government of Guyana of the Esquazú Agreement that recognizes public participation and access to information on the environment, as well as other agreements, such as the Minamata Accord regarding no mercury use, the Kimberley Diamond Process, and the UN Environmental Climate Change and Biodiversity. All of these play an important role in policy development and implementation, paving the road for sector transparency, intergenerational benefits, and improved frameworks for accountability. I would like to begin this exciting panel discussion by introducing the Deputy Permanent Secretary, Mr. VISHAL AMBEDKAR from the Ministry of Natural Resources, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, RENA. First of all, let me say how happy I am this afternoon to be part of this interesting discussion that you guys would have set up. As you're aware, the Ministry of Natural Resources has a responsibility for the management and oversight of 3 agencies, which includes GGMC, GFC, and the GGB. Pretty soon, we will have the Petroleum Commission of Guyana being added to that list. And all of this is with the sole purpose to develop and implement, oversee policies for the responsible exploration, development, utilization of our natural resources, while at the same time ensuring the protection of our environment. As you're aware that Guyana is a developing country and we need to extract our resources to ensure the development of our people and our country. But the manner in which we do that, we also have to do it in a way that we limit the environmental impact that those processes may have. The government of Guyana has made a conscious decision to reiterate its endorsement and commitment in implementing a wide range of international treaties, of which the objectives are focused on establishing a network of responsible and sustainable governance of all sectors of the economy, especially the natural resource sector. This, of course, would not only benefit the people of Guyana, but it will also benefit the world. We have entered into partnership with a number of international programs and projects, which the government of Guyana finds valuable to the development goals that we have. Some of them include, of course, the EITI, the EU FLED program, the FCPF program, we have the RED program, just to name a few. Apart from this, the Ministry of Legal Affairs is working on strengthening and reforming existing legislation to align the legal, regulatory, institutional framework necessary to support government's transparency and accountability policies and initiatives. The Ministry of Natural Resources has issued a request for a proposal for consultancies to conduct feasibility study and systematic disclosure of beneficial ownership, ownership registry. With the emerging sectors that we have, it is evident more than ever that we have to put measures in place to ensure a sustainable development of our resources, and EITI has been playing a meaningful role in ensuring that the government develop policies for good governance. Recently, the EITI would have completed its report, and that report is available for all to read and debate, with maybe emphasis played on playing a more meaningful part and demand more from government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vishal, for this important information. I would like to introduce Newell Dennison, the Commissioner from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My presentation is going to be a little tight on time, so I'm going to be moving very quickly. And one of the objectives here is just to give an overview of the sector, and by allusions, try to have you appreciate where and what we're doing that speaks to the conversation on the transparency policies as from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission's outlook. So here we go. So the Guyana's mining sector could be considered the most significant of the extractive sectors, and I'm going to be focusing here on mining and not oil and gas that has its own life. Even without considering the contribution of the oil and gas subsector, which at this time is conveniently placed within the mining sector on account mainly that the GGMC is the bona fide regulator, we have to recognize that as a subsector, mining itself stands on its own feet. The GGMC is the supervisory authority for the mining sector under the anti-money laundering and counter-financial terrorism regime. With an important national review upcoming in 2022, the GGMC has had to work closely with other government agencies to ensure that the overall outcome is that Guyana is compliant and that systems are satisfactory, sufficiently adequate, and sustainable. Understanding that countering anti-money laundering and financial terrorism along the transnational financial crimes requires strong and pliable systems. The mining sector in Guyana is a Guyana dollars multi-billion-dollar enterprise. It involves directly about 20,000 to 30,000 persons and about 50,000 plus indirectly. There are three levels of tenure, being small, medium, and large scale, but only the large scale is fully open to non-Guyanese. Of course, again, I'm referring to non-oil and gas sector. Mining has over the past 15 to 20 years competed and presently overtaken agriculture as the main pillar of Guyana's economy, accounting for about 10% plus of GDP and the leader in foreign exchange earnings. Understandably, the mining sector has attracted strong attention from the GYEITI. The extensive footprint of the sector's participants, the transportability of gold and diamonds, the unofficial places where border crossings can occur, the limited institutional presence in the hinterland where mining is concentrated, the limited regulatory presence at all mining locations all make this sector a prime study. Notwithstanding, there must be an appreciation for how the sector operates, so as not to frustrate efforts and resources on relatively low-risk issues.
It seems like we lost connection for a second with Mr. Dennison. Let's just make sure that we have him connected back. I believe that we are connected. Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry. So as a consequence of the mining theater being in the hinterland, there are itinerant miners who are underdocumented and or improperly documented, mostly due to the absence of government services to issue IDs and work permits and such. Of course, this creates opportunity for non-accountability, exploitation, crime, and parallel systems. The GGMC's presence represents, in many instances, the most visible state institutional presence in the hinterland, but the GGMC's Act and regulations empower in relation only to mining. Example, mining safety, inspections of operations for production, among other prescribed documentation under the mining legislation. Guyana doesn't have a formal enterprise forest financing, so at the local level, there are non-documented or informally documented financial transactions which form the crux of the sustainability of the mining sector at the small scale, in particular, as well as the medium scale. It should be fairly obvious how this type of reality runs counter to the concept of transparency. It could also explain in some ways why the attitude of compliance with reporting accurately, if at all, is not always forthcoming. Such reporting offers nothing should the investment arrangements fall through and the parties are left broke and broken. Notwithstanding, it may be surprising to some when even those who are on the fringe of the accountability of the accountable and of the law are found making diligent efforts to declare their production. Within the mining sector, the typical areas of financial implications where there can be unlawful conduct are in respect of land tenure, where persons choose to trespass on tenure of others, in respect of registration of equipment and notification of the equipment locations, the timely and regular completion of their operations and production records, attempts to evade the payment of royalties by smuggling production away from the authorities. The GGMC, to mitigate that, has 17 mining stations from which mines officers operate, intending to reaching on a regular basis all documented operations at least once per quarter. In the line of duty, officers will encounter undocumented operations, which would face the citations according to the regulations. Such operations would have to become regularized or face increasingly more severe action by the officers. In the field, there are layers of inspection even though coordination is exercised. In other words, officers from one division may pass through an area, but another division may arrive in the same area out of cycle to conduct another activity such as environmental compliance. All field officers have the same general training as mines officers and are so gazetted. So these actions establish and reinforce compliance. If necessary, they are enforcement sweeps through areas where intelligence supports the need for such. As can be expected, when remote and away from formal structured institutions, there is opportunity for corruption at different levels. Corruption has to be tackled from different directions with strong systems, with working administrative and management tools. The GGMC is a systems and rule-based organization. Training is a strong point in empowering our officers, but also in making them accountable for their actions and conduct. Recognizing that there can never be enough boots on the ground, smart operationalization is necessary. Continuous and accurate documentation from the fields to reconcile with internal records build the ability to analyze for strategic action either at clusters or hotspots, to interrogate reports that deal with potential conflicts and tenure with documentation or source of production. The GGMC has been improving and optimizing the role of IT solutions in our processes. Embracing technology has provided another window. Remote imagery from satellite coverage is being incorporated through multi-agency platforms. The use of drones is coming on stream as well. Trackers on vehicles of our fleet bring another level of accountability for how our officers are required to report and operate. Improving interconnectivity between our stations and the HQ, which could lead to greater decentralization of our services, which will assist in removing opportunistic areas for corruption, and which invariably can lead to more significant exploitation. The GGMC has represented that the risks to the sector have to be realistically considered, and this would aid tremendously in the deployment of resources. Typically, there is good conduct and compliance among larger producers and large-scale operators. The top 100 operators, for example, produce approximately 70 to 80% of gold production. Of the thousands of minor players, the scope for large-scale corruption and misbehavior can therefore be considered minimal, as at these levels the financials are not as evident. On the other hand, if the cumulative effect is documented, the incidences of minor events would give a different picture. It is important then to have a balanced approach as we go about our business. My comments and observations about the avoidance of the natural resource curse are few. Mining is going to continue expanding and will include eventually other strategic minerals development, downstream development in manufacturing and industry as energy and power options become competitive and available. With mining contributing science, engineering, and technology across the board, agriculture in particular, tourism and services, capitalizing on our rich biodiversity, for example, pharmaceuticals, are all ready to offset and balance at a macroeconomic level, saving off, hopefully, the natural resource curse. I would speculate our chances are better also if Guyana's skilled population grows to contribute to our competitiveness. And in a nutshell, I hope that I've been able to give a succinct overview and understanding and appreciation of where and how we deal with our transparency and governance matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Newell Dennison, for your important words and message. And now I'd like to introduce Mr. Bobby Gossel Jr., who is the Senior Petroleum Coordinator of the Ministry of Natural Resources.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon or good evening to everyone that is joining us here on this very important panel discussion on Guyana's national governance and transparency policies. My focus will be on the oil and gas industry, which is relatively new to Guyana in terms of being a producing economy, but of course, coming off from what Mr. Newell Dennison would have mentioned, oil and gas has a life of its own, and oil and gas has been the subject of much interaction, debate, and hopefulness for many decades. We as a country, as we would all be fully aware, have started to produce oil in December of 2019. We started our first export in 2020, and now we are on the stage of looking towards the next operation that will come on stream sometime by the end of the third quarter of this year. The management of the petroleum sector has been in a process of evolution. We have the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, which is still part of the main regulatory unit of the government arm. We have within the Ministry of Natural Resources, the Petroleum Management Program, which is the organization that is dealing with all aspects as it relates to the technical governance, the administrative governance, as well as the legal and economic and fiscal governance of the petroleum sector of the economy. What will be happening as we move forward later this year, as mentioned by the Deputy Permanent Secretary, is the creation of the Petroleum Commission of Guyana. That will become the main legislative, regulatory, and governing organization for petroleum management in the economy. But just to give us a sense of where we are as an oil and gas producing and exporting economy, as we like to say. To date, we have 19 commercial discoveries from one block, that is a Stabroek block. To date, we have an estimate of over 9 billion barrels of oil equivalent. And of course, that is coming with multiple exploration potential for the rest of this year, as well as all the way into 2025. Guyana is a country that is positioned to generate great long-term cash flow, both for the government as well as for the operators. And of course, using the principles and conditions of EITI, the oil and gas sector and the way in which we govern it will have to be very critical in terms of the revenue management of the oil and gas industry. We know that Guyana is lucrative in terms of investment. It's an attractive destination for oil and gas investment. As it is right now, we are moving into the second operation. The third one will come on stream sometime by 2024, that's Payara. And then we move into the fourth development for Guyana, which is the Yellowtail, sometime about 25, 26. All of these developments are happening at a time when we are speaking about the energy transition in the world economy. But it's also happening at a time where deep offshore discoveries and the development of it per barrel is at a lower price as well. So today we look at the price of oil and we see when we look at the break-even development of these particular types of investment and development, that profitability is there. So revenue inflow into the country, when we say that there's great long-term cash flow, it's not something that is just being expected. It's something that we have on the cards and looking towards the development of the economy and how that revenue will be managed. Of course, moving in over the next 10 years, we expect to see about 10 floating production storage and offloading facility offshore Guyana, which of course will drive other industries and the creation of more activities in the economic basin of Guyana. The way in which we are going to put principles, policies, and legislation in place must be very important, especially with the institutional activities and the institutional creation that we must have here in Guyana. EITI will be very critical for the oil and gas industry. EITI is not something that started a few years ago. The development of, or the conversation on Guyana's Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative started, I'm sure Mr. Newell Dennison will be able to tell us this, but I do recall sometime around 2007, and moved into being more on the forefront around 2012. And now here we are with the first report being done for 2017, and this year the second report was published for 2018. This is all in keeping with good governance and transparency for the extractive industries. Initially, the conversation and the focus was on the mining industry. As the Deputy Permanent Secretary mentioned, we also have other types of transparency measures for the fishing industry as well as for the forestry sector. But focusing on mining and as now on to the oil and gas industry, it is something that we will have to put forward from a government standpoint, that it is not only about the government signing on to EITI, but also the operators in the industry signing on to EITI. There are other areas where the large operators, the companies themselves, have adhered to the principles of EITI. So this is something that we will want to work on for the oil and gas industry, particularly for the upstream oil and gas sector, and as Guyana moves into 2024, into the midstream sector. In terms of transparency, we are also developing from our side more accessibility to data on what is happening in the industry and how this can be shared between key partners in the industry, as well as what information should be put out there in the public domain. We are trying to create a mechanism where we want to be able to share as much information as possible on what is taking place, the productive activities that are taking place offshore Guyana. And of course, from the government side, we are in the process of creating a petroleum data management system, which will help with the synchronization of data as well as the sharing of critical information between different government agencies. And of course, those government agencies which govern the entire spectrum of oil and gas in the economy ranges from the Office of the President and the Office of the Vice President, the Ministry of Natural Resources, the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, which is an agency of the Ministry of Legal Affairs, the Ministry of Finance, the Guyana Revenue Authority, the Bureau of Statistics, and the Guyana National Bureau of Standards, as well as the Bureau of Statistics in Guyana and the Bank of Guyana. So we can see that when you talk about transparency and good governance for the oil and gas sector, there are a line of agencies that are responsible for the management of the data that is coming into the country, responsible for the management of the legislation, as well as those that are responsible for administering the policies that will guide the development of this country. And those policies range from technical and administrative policies to the fiscal policies that we have in place. Some of those fiscal issues which we are considering is how to avoid the resource curse or the effects of the Dutch disease on our national economy. Now, we all know that we are talking about the extractive industry. Guyana is not a country that is a one commodity type economy. From the mining side, we have a host of minerals and a wealth of those. We've had a boom of, this is perhaps a second boom in this century of the gold industry, and that is driven primarily by the price that is happening on the world market. We all know that the time when the world was in the financial crisis, the price of gold was also going up. We were also in a food crisis at that time. And it has been reported very widely that the prudent macroeconomic management of the government of Guyana allowed this country to be able to sustain its growth path and to be able to ensure that we did not go into negative growth rates during those difficult periods. But now that we have an oil and gas economy, we have to change the mechanism in which we manage these wealth that are coming from these resources. So there's a Natural Resource Fund Act, which brings about a natural resource fund that is at the Federal Reserve in New York. In that fund right now, we have over $300 million US dollars that are from the oil and gas industry alone. But the act itself needs to be amended, as well as the fiscal rules that are stated within that piece of legislation as we move forward into an economy that is looking to have proper expenditure from such fund, to be able to save for the future and also to invest for intergenerational equity. So when we talk about the Natural Resource Fund, of course, this is something that will be debated in Parliament, and whether it will be termed our Sovereign Wealth Fund or Heritage Fund or Savings Fund or Rainy Day Fund, whatever fund it is, it will be the main fiscal boundaries in which we will have to be able to access funds into that account. And that will be done through parliamentary oversight. So once again, that's the level of accountability that we want to put on the revenues that are coming from the oil and gas industry. But of course, the new organization would be the Petroleum Commission. And there are other things from the fiscal side which the government is working on, such as cost recovery audit and the verification of profitability. And for us as a country on the oil and gas industry, I will repeat it once again, we are looking at the technical side, the administrative side, the legal side, as well as the fiscal approach to the management of the petroleum economy. Those are my opening words on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bobby Gossel, for informing us really about a much talked about sector. I mean, everybody's got the word oil and gas on their mind, and we really appreciate the amount of information provided. I would now like to take this opportunity to welcome Ms. Untitled Thompson from the Guyana Gold Board to speak a little bit about the sector. Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I think it is commendable at this time for us to have such a workshop or conference here that the extractive industry can be showcased, if I can put it that way. For the Guyana Gold Board that came into existence by an act of parliament in 1982. And the mandate of the Guyana Gold Board basically is to carry on the business of trading in gold. It's to secure at all times an adequate supply of gold and to ensure equitable distribution in Ghana at fair prices. It's to sell gold outside of Ghana, to engage in other related commercial and or industrial activities. And with these mandates in mind, over the years, we've seen that the Guyana Gold Board has taken on a whole different spectrum, in that the volume of gold declared, and Guyana Gold Board, and I should be very specific here, Guyana Gold Board only deals with declarations. Our sister agency, GGMC, will be able to say on production, but Guyana Gold Board deals with declaration. Whatever has been declared to the Guyana Gold Board, that's what is published. And over the years, the declarations have grown exponentially from 1982 to current, where we see a spike in 2016. Guyana Gold Board touched 712,000 ounces. As such, in 1998, the Guyana Gold Board had taken a different step in licensing agents, because the Guyana Gold Board may not be able to be in all the interior locations. Therefore, we have licensed agents to act on the Guyana Gold Board's behalf. So we call them licensed gold dealers. And because they are licensed to work on behalf of the Guyana Gold Board, it therefore calls for strict or enhanced scrutiny or surveillance, if we want to put it that way. And under the Money Laundering Act, the AMLC, in compliance with AML-CFT, Guyana Gold Board has been appointed the Security Authority on Gold Trade. And as such, we have to monitor the gold trading activities in Ghana. So we have the licensed gold dealers and we have traders, those who have been licensed to have shops in the interior, and those who, so they're termed traders, they're termed traders as they would buy gold, or we would say barter gold in the interior. And for transparency, compliance is paramount. So we have to ensure that our traders and our dealers, our licensed gold dealers, are compliant, to the extent that sometimes you hear that there is over-regulation. The regulations are onerous, and we try as much, because we realize that under the last national risk assessment that was done, the gold sector, the gold trading sector was rated high, medium to high. And we always have to keep monitoring what goes on in the gold trading sector. We're faced with challenges, as I said, compliance. There are times when we have the varying prices of gold. The Guyana Gold Board has a pricing methodology where we use the London fix, the 2 fixes for the day. And we will, because our dealers are businessmen, we cannot say to them that you must use the London fix. They have to fix a price that would be good for them in the market. And as such, we will have the disparity where we may want, sometimes our miners may want to say, oh, they have, they were cheated as such, but Guyana Gold Board at all times tried to bring the balance in the sector. The sector is over-reliance on cash, and we are moving in a different direction where we are partnering with the Bank of Guyana. They have what we call the electronic funds transfer. We're saying to our miners, listen, you need not be using all this cash, and in a time of this pandemic, where you have to be in long lines at the bank, we can find a solution, or you can do business differently. As such, we are with the Guyana Gold Board, the Bank of Guyana, where the electronic transfer project will be soon rolled out. And we hope that our miners take advantage of this. The miners, we deduct royalties and taxes from our miners, and they're remitted to our agencies, the Guyana Revenue Authority, and also the GGMC. For our dealers as reporting entities, the Guyana Gold Board conducts desk-based reviews. The Guyana Gold Board does site visits to our dealers to ensure that they're in full compliance. We are required to monitor the gold that we buy from the mine to the market. How is this done? Because the Guyana Gold Board does not have an arm that will be a part of the investigation or the monitoring in the mines. As such, we collaborate with our sister agency, the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. And so far, we are able to work assiduously in having our dealers regulated, knowing where they purchase the metal from or who they purchase the metal from. And they also have a reporting obligation where our dealers report on a bi-weekly basis to us, giving us a list of all the clients that they purchase from and the clients' KYC, that they know their customers, their profile. So the Guyana Gold Board also collaborates with GRA, the Guyana Revenue Authority. However, to a lesser extent, because of their regulations, they're unable to share much information with us. However, we share invitation with them. There are various MOUs that have been signed in all as a part of ensuring that the sector is in full compliance. As such, I would like to say this is the Guyana Gold Board. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Ms. Undireene Thompson, for sharing very important information on the gold sector with us. Finally, I would like to present Mr. SRIDAR KANNAN for operation. He's an operations analyst and consultant with the World Bank. He is joining us from the other side of the world. So thank you.
Thank you very much, RENA, and thank you to the esteemed panelists as well for giving us such a good deep dive into the Guyana context. As my opening remarks, I'd like to take a step back and just give you the bird's eye view, if you will, of transparency and accountability and where it fits in and why it's required for the extractive sector. So initially, there's no doubt that Guyana is an emerging resource-rich country, right? We already know from its most recent EITI report that Guyana has around 20% of its GDP and 60% of its exports owed to the extractive industries, mainly led by mining under the 2018 report. But when oil production comes online, this statistic is going to skew more in favor of extractives, right? More towards extractives. To what extent can it go to? One international example is Iraq, where around 60% of the GDP, 90% of government revenues, and 95% of exports for the past decade have been from the extractive sector. So I'm not saying this will be the case, but I mean, the sector does have, because of the large amount of revenues that it generates in a short period of time, the tendency to crowd out other sectors. So briefly, what does this mean for Guyana? Where do these international initiatives fit in? And, what's the use, of them all? That's what I'd like to deal with. So firstly, the extractive sector, when managed well, can be an engine of growth and sustainable development. However, when mismanaged, it leads in adverse economic, environmental, and social consequences, which in worst case scenarios have been described as the resource curse in certain countries. Now, there are unique characteristics to the extractive sector, and there is a science to managing it, natural resource management, which is pretty complex. And this complex science is embodied in these international instruments and standards, which either delineate what steps are to be followed, or they provide the right kind of data to follow those steps. So EITI, for example, is a good example of an initiative that gives you the right kind of data for you to implement good governance practices. It's not a good governance practice in itself. I mean, it is in terms of transparency and accountability, a good governance practice. But in terms of the data that it discloses, it's an enabling tool for improving governance. So even if I were to take the good aspect of extractive industries into consideration, for example, revenues, there are so many unique characteristics to extractive revenues, which is the good part, and let alone the environmental and social consequences, which are the not so good part of extractive industries, oftentimes. When you look at extractive revenues, they are finite, whereas your goals of economic development are more long-term. These revenues are volatile, so if the budget is fueled by extractive revenues mainly on a year-on-year basis, it's likely to go up and down a lot. The size of these revenues is sometimes so large, and Mr. GOSSAI had also referred to it earlier, that it causes what's called the Dutch disease. Basically, it crowds out all your other exports because the value of your currency becomes too strong. And fourthly, the institutional capacity to absorb these kind of revenues might not be present. So this is just in terms of the good part of it, which is the revenues, right? So similarly, on each aspect of extractive industries, there are good practices and standards which are embodied in a lot of the conventions that Guyana has signed up to. So I would like to wish Guyana very good luck in implementing EITI and all its other initiatives on transparency and accountability. I've kept my speech rather short because we've had a deep dive into Guyana's context. Just one thing I'd like to say about EITI is that it serves two purposes. One is that it gives you the right kind of data for you to implement the right kind of activities, good governance. And the second is not to undercut it and not to undermine it, the multi-stakeholder dialogue, which is established in the multi-stakeholder group. And using these two, several countries, the tripartite stakeholders of several countries, be it government, be it civil society, or be it private sector, have benefited. And I'll just leave you with a few concrete examples of how these stakeholders have benefited. The government, for example, in Afghanistan managed to ring fence corporate income taxes, which is it's a process of charging corporate income tax per mine instead of per company. It gives you more corporate income taxes. They managed to do that using EITI data by simply linking licenses to the company, right? Because of EITI data, otherwise it wouldn't have been possible. In Ethiopia, the private sector, where a potash company wanted to operate in Ethiopia, and where there were slight problems with operating in the local context, it resorted to the MSG to actually resolve the conflict and give it the social license to operate, because the MSG was seen as more credible than the government or the private sector, which the local people felt had their own self-interests. And lastly, EITI has also benefited civil society in many countries. Civil society, apart from just participating in the MSG to produce the EITI report, has created things like open data models and so on and so forth for them to understand the data coming out of EITI and to contribute in an informed manner towards natural resource management discussions. And so it's a very important process. It's good that Guyana is going through it at an early stage rather than at a later stage, so that there are not so many legacy issues in the sector. So thank you very much for your time, and I think I'll wrap up my speech with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Kiri Sabaslai. I am the producer behind the scenes, and this is the time to take some questions from the audience. And we are really, really glad to have our panelists still with us. And I have just a few questions. We have time for about 2 to 3 questions. So let's see, the first one that came in was the following. In the Stabra contract, a tax receipt is required to be written by the Minister of Natural Resources for the oil companies. Is that receipt disclosed as part of EITI? Let's see which of our panelists would like to take on this question.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question for me, please?
Yes, of course. The question is that in the Stabra contract, a tax receipt is required to be written by the Minister of Natural Resources for the oil companies. In that receipt, is that receipt disclosed as part of EITI?
Yes, that receipt will have to be disclosed as part of the EITI process, because we also have an audit verification process. And once that audit verification is done, the records are made open to EITI and to the public.
Thank you so much, Mr. GOSSAI. The next question is the following. The media, oil and gas governance network, and others have complained that it is difficult to get oil production data and other reports from the Ministry of Natural Resources. When will the ministry put out oil reports and full production data in a timely manner on an ongoing basis?
Right, thank you for that question. I think I spoke about us at the ministry and the government creating a new website to produce those reports and to have information come out in as real time as possible, where we would want to provide monthly as well as quarterly, and where necessary, weekly output data, and also other information that are pertinent towards the activities that are taking place offshore. Currently, we are working on that website and it will be made public very soon.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Ms. Thompson. Can Ms. Thompson please say if the Royal Canadian Mint Company is still refusing to accept gold from the Guyana Gold Board owing to the allegations of El Dorado offshore processing Venezuela gold?
The Guyana Gold Board, the Royal Canadian Mint is accepting gold from the Guyana Gold Board. However, if the Guyana Gold Board takes gold from El Dorado Trading, one of our licensed dealers, the Royal Canadian Mint will not accept that. So that still stands. They are asking for an investigation into the allegation of gold smuggling. An investigation was done. However, the Guyana Gold Board does not have an investigative arm. Based on our processes and procedures at the Guyana Gold Board, we can only speak from that standpoint. It will not, therefore, reflect or tell us if there is smuggling or if there is not, smuggling. So we cannot pronounce on smuggling, and that's where it is.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thompson. The next question is for Mr. GOSSAI, and here it is. Mr. GOSSAI, we have never seen any of the tax certificate info. Where can we find that?
Never see the tax certificate from the oil and gas sector. As I said, we are in the process of completing our cost recovery audit process. When that process is completed, then certain information will be made available to EITI and to the public in general. So we have done the first one, and we are in the process of starting the second one later this year. As you would recall, we have started production in 2019, but activities have been taking place way before that. It took us a while, that is the government, to be able to have the cost recovery audit be undertaken, review the reports, verify the reports. That process is in the final stage. And once it is made, once it has been completed and agreed by all parties, then the information will be put out there.
Thank you so much. It's very, very helpful to know. The next question is the negotiation process of the Stabroek Block License Agreement disclosed as part of EITI? Who would like to take that question?
I'll give an initial answer, then anyone else can jump in. So the first renegotiation of the contract was done in 2016. I think a lot of information on that was made very public, starting with the issue of the sign-in bonus, moving forward to the release of the contract until almost a year later. Through EITI, you can find all of the contracts on their website, as well as on the ministry's website, and of course in the new website that will be created for Petroleum directly. The process of renegotiation, there are certain aspects which will be made very public. Of course, this is a bargaining situation. Not everything can be shared with the public, as some information will have to be discussed privately, and also as well as from a legal standpoint as it relates to confidentiality and what are the bargaining on the table. But it is clear that because of the commitment that as a country we have towards EITI for the various extractive industries, then the process and the manner in which it will be done, that is renegotiation, will be made open and clear as you go through the different stages of renegotiation coming up to the next set of contracts over the next 5 years or so.
Thank you very much, Mr. GOSSAI. Any other panelists would like to add to this question? If not, we have plenty more to go.
Yes, I was actually wondering what they mean by the negotiating process, because even in the early days, there was a mechanism that was outlined in the public domain of how the government engaged with any company that was going to be licensed under the Petroleum Act.
Mr. GOSSAI, would you like to react to that question?
Sorry, I lost you on the last part there, Mr. Dennison.
No, I was wondering what they meant when they said the negotiating process, because my recollection is that we had published, and it was in the public domain forever, the process by which we would engage companies who were interested in exploring for oil in Guyana.
Right, I would assume that they meant from the time of start of consideration for renegotiation, and then as you reach different milestones. I wouldn't assume that they would mean that the process will be live stream as we are here today. So that is what I would hope. But of course, as you rightfully said, there are certain things which need to be made public during the process as well.
Thank you so much. And we are coming to our last question here today. Guyana's US $900 million gas to shore project, what role the EITI has on this very project?
So the gas to energy project is a new project. It has been made public since last year. There was a press briefing by the Vice President who's responsible for energy on the project with an indication of the layout of what the project is expected to cost, the geographic zones that will be impacted on the pipeline from offshore all the way to the development of the industrial estate. EITI will be part of this process as we move in to the various aspects of this project. So this project has different phases, which deals with the offshore development, and then landing onto shore, and then we're coming through the cross-country, as we like to say, onto the development of the industrial estate. The government has made it very clear that this entire process must be transparent. That is, the procurement process of the gas to energy process must be very transparent in terms of who's developing it, how it should be developed, and of course, open opportunities to businesses locally and international. EITI will have to be involved in this process because this is something that will be determined as we look at the contract that we have. This is a development of associated gas coming from the Stabroek block from the Liza Phase 1. So EITI will be involved in this process as those decisions have been made. At this point in time, the site selection is under review as well as the route for the pipeline is under review. As soon as those decisions are made and the technical and feasibility undertaken from the environmental perspectives have been done, then EITI will come in as it relates to the commercial and fiscal side of the operation.
Thank you so much, Mr. GOSSAI. And we are at the end of our panel discussion today. I would like to extend my thank you for all of our panelists. And also I would like to thank you, our moderator earlier, Ms. RENA GUENDUEZ, for her guidance with this discussion today. And all of our panelists, thank you so much for taking all these questions. I know that we can always count on this wonderful audience to feed you some questions to keep you on your toes and keep the conversation lively and discussion very important and relevant to transparency. And in closing, I would like to highlight some of the events that are happening later today, because today is the first day of this week-long conference on transparency. And we have some more activities happening this afternoon. I would like to invite everybody back at 4 o'clock Guyana time to hear from one of our neighbors, Trinidad and Tobago, and hear their experience using EITI data to inform public policy and dialogue. It's a real case story. You get to ask some questions. You get to hear from their experience. Hopefully, it's going to give you some real good information on transparency and how it could work. Now at 5 o'clock, we have another panel discussion with esteemed experts. The topic is conflict, competing interest in the extractive sector, how to reduce risk and conflict and reap benefits. We are going to have a similarly lively conversation with our panelists and take some questions from the audience. And that will bring us to the end of the day. And after a day worth of hard work from all of our speakers and our wonderful audience, we would like to wind down with a little bit of networking and some informal conversation. And that is what our cocktail networking event is set out to do. It is going to be very lighthearted, fun, just to connect with your fellow audience members and panelists and have some conversations, somewhat face-to-face, you know, still through the virtual platform that we have here set up. And that is starting at 6:30 today. Now, all of this information is available on the website for the conference. Please spend a second and take a look at the chat. I have been putting some information there for you that could be very helpful for you for the remainder of the week. In fact, our conference website has resources for experts, for people interested in the extractive sectors, interested in transparency, some specific information for journalists, available grants that they can apply for. We are building this resource hub so that people at large can benefit from it. And also that particular website has a survey. We are very much interested in your opinion and perception on transparency in the extractive sector. And the whole survey is aimed to capture some of your perceptions. And it is a live survey. The results are coming in real time. So when you have a chance and complete the survey, you'll be able to see what others were thinking. And as we are progressing in this week-long event, check out the survey results time to time, because more and more people will respond, and we will see a robust number of people adding their perception to where we stand with transparency in the extractive sector in Guyana. So take a moment and grab some links here from the chat. Make sure that you have them before we close out this session for today. And also, we would love to hear your feedback on this particular panel discussion. So just take a moment and grab some links from the chat before we close this out. And with that, I would like to say thank you for our panelists. Thank you for our moderator for today's lively conversation. And thank you for the wonderful audience for feeding these exciting questions for us. Let's take a quick break, and at 4 o'clock, we will be back with Trinidad and Tobago and their experience using EITA data to inform their public policy and the dialogue that they started. So have a lovely afternoon and hope to see you for the remainder of today's event. And don't forget the cocktail hour at 6:30. Grab the link for you. No registration, no nothing required. Just click on the link at 6:30. Grab your link. Maybe you even want to grab a mango sour, as I understand that is a local delicacy, or something that would put you in a mood where you can connect with your fellow colleagues, with your fellow Guyanese, and with people interested in the topic of transparency. Thank you so much. We will see you at 4 o'clock.